The autumn morning of September 19, 1777, broke over the rolling hills of Saratoga with a fragile calm. But beneath the mist, history was about to pivot on a knife's edge. The air was thick with the scent of dew-soaked earth, gunpowder, and the faint metallic tang of fear. Thousands of soldiers, ragged yet resolute, pressed against the limits of their endurance, men who, days before, had been farmers, blacksmiths, or tradesmen, now transformed into the living fulcrum of a revolution. This was the battlefield that would etch the fate of nations. The outcome, a decisive American victory that would shatter the British plan to split the rebellious colonies and, more shockingly, convince France to commit its formidable fleet and resources to the American cause. In the grand theater of empires, the world had shifted in a heartbeat. The world has changed in a heartbeat. If this shocking turn of history already sends chills down your spine, hit subscribe and join us as we unravel every twist and battle. Share your first thoughts below before we step onto the smoke-filled battlefield. Picture the first light piercing the horizon. Soldiers tighten leather straps, musket barrels glinting. Horses paw at the muddy earth. In the villages nearby, women and children clutch one another, hearing rumors of advancing armies, yet uncertain of which flag will wave victorious. The tension is almost tangible, as if the wind itself holds its breath. Somewhere, a young Continental soldier wipes the blood from his hands and prays for courage. Across the field, a British officer pores over maps, unaware that a series of mistakes and miscalculations will seal their fate. How could a ragtag collection of colonies, underestimated by the mightiest empire in the world, deliver such a staggering blow? How did the actions here, on this unassuming stretch of upstate New York, ripple outward to redraw the balance of power across continents? By the time the sun climbs higher, the answers will be written in smoke, blood, and the enduring legacy of courage. Wide shots reveal undulating hills, dense forests, and the faint outlines of forts. The stage is set, the players are poised, and the die is about to be cast. In the years leading up to 1777, the 13 American colonies simmered with a mixture of resentment, hope, and defiance. Britain, flush with imperial confidence, believed its colonial grip unshakable, relying on a well-trained army and a navy that ruled the seas. Yet beneath the veneer of control, tension festered. Taxes on everyday goods, tea, paper, and stamps were more than fiscal measures. They were symbolic affronts to liberty. Rumors of tyranny spread like wildfire through taverns and town halls, whispered by merchants, artisans, and farmers who had once trusted the crown. By 1775, open rebellion had erupted. Lexington and Concord sounded the first alarm, a clarion call to patriots willing to stake their lives on the fragile dream of self-governance. George Washington, recently appointed commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, understood the stakes. Victory would not only demand courage, but cunning, resilience, and unity among fractious colonies. On the British side, General John Burgoyne was tasked with a bold plan: march south from Canada through the Hudson River corridor, sever New England from the southern colonies, and crush the rebellion at its route. Numbers alone seemed to favor Britain. Burgoyne commanded an army of approximately 7,000, including seasoned regulars, loyalist auxiliaries, and native allies. The Americans, by contrast, relied on militia units and Continental regiments totaling near 4,000 at Saratoga, diverse in skill, inconsistent in discipline, but burning with conviction. The terrain itself became an actor in this unfolding drama. The Hudson River Valley was a tangle of dense forests, marshes, and narrow ravines, a natural choke point that would magnify strategic ingenuity or magnify mistakes. Maps drawn on the eve of the campaign reveal the challenges: bridges over swollen creeks, ridges suitable for ambush, and river crossings that could slow or fragment a marching army. Both sides understood that mastery of this geography could mean victory or annihilation. Whispers of betrayal and defection floated through the ranks. Loyalist sympathizers, spies, and double agents moved like shadows, carrying intelligence, misinformation, or sometimes despair. On the American side, Benedict Arnold, a young and fiercely ambitious officer, conducted daring reconnaissance missions, observing British encampments under cover of night. Local civilians, though terrified, became the quiet enablers of intelligence guiding scouts through hidden paths, offering food and shelter and risking retribution if caught. Politically, the stakes extended far beyond the battlefield. The fledgling Continental Congress wrestled with scarce resources, internal dissent, and the ever-present threat of desertion. Overseas, the eyes of France lingered. For years, French diplomats had watched the conflict, weighing whether the colony's rebellion could truly destabilize Britain. A decisive American victory could tip the scales, offering France a chance to avenge past defeats and reclaim influence in North America. Economically, the British were confident that superior supply lines and industry would crush the rebellion. Wagons laden with arms, provisions, and artillery trudged southward, the rhythmic creak of wheels and the bray of horses marking the relentless march of empire. But these very lines of supply made them vulnerable. American forces, adept at guerrilla-style harassment, exploited every wooded ravine, every hidden ford, and every delay to weaken their enemy. In the weeks preceding Saratoga, prior encounters had already shaken confidence. Small skirmishes, ambushes, and raids inflicted casualties that, while minor on paper, eroded morale and revealed vulnerabilities in the British approach. Civilians along the Hudson whispered of the Green Devil militia, ragged farmers who could disappear into the forest, strike without warning, and vanish before the enemy could retaliate. These tales, half legend, half reality, shaped the mental landscape for commanders and soldiers alike. Burgoyne's plan was audacious but rigid. He expected reinforcements from New York City and coordination with British forces moving from Lake Ontario. Yet miscommunications, delays, and terrain obstacles conspired to isolate his army. Meanwhile, Washington's strategic vision, though cautious, relied on local knowledge, the ingenuity of subordinate commanders, and the sheer determination of men who had no choice but to fight for their homes, families, and the principle of liberty itself. Every campfire conversation, every letter dispatched, every musket polished in the morning mist carried weight. The Americans understood that their cause was fragile. A misstep could crush the revolution before it had time to ignite. Yet within that fragility was a kernel of audacious courage, the kind that could exploit the overconfidence of an empire. The stage was set. Two armies, divided by strategy and circumstance, poised to collide in a series of engagements that would reverberate through history. As September approached, the air grew heavy with anticipation. Smoke from distant skirmishes mingled with the scent of autumn leaves and river mud. Villagers hid their children and livestock, praying for survival while soldiers sharpened bayonets and adjusted leather straps. In this crucible, leaders would be tested, loyalties questioned, and the fate of a continent hung precariously between the barrel of a musket and the courage of ordinary men. As September deepened into autumn, the Hudson River Valley became a living chessboard. Continental troops, under the watchful eyes of Generals Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, moved with a careful combination of caution and audacity. Camps dotted the forests and riverbanks, smoke curling from makeshift chimneys, mingling with the crisp scent of fallen leaves. Soldiers inspected muskets, patched uniforms, and whispered prayers. Each man carried not only a weapon but the weight of destiny. The American strength lay not in numbers but in ingenuity. Militia units familiar with the terrain conducted reconnaissance missions, mapping trails, observing British encampments, and noting every ridge and ravine suitable for ambush. Benedict Arnold, a figure both admired and feared, rode through forests under the veil of night, rallying intelligence, inspiring troops, and laying the groundwork for tactical maneuvers that would soon confound the British. His presence was magnetic. Even the most timid soldier felt a surge of courage at the sight of his determined gaze. Logistics were painstaking. Food, gunpowder, and ammunition were scarce, often arriving in small batches from neighboring towns. Local farmers offered provisions and shelter, their homes doubling as temporary hospitals or supply depots. Every wagon, horse, and barrel carried significance. A single misstep could starve the army or leave them defenseless. Soldiers scavenged, hunted, and improvised. Each act of survival became a testament to resilience. Defensive fortifications were carefully studied and constructed. Earthworks, abatis, and hastily felled trees created choke points along the narrow corridors of advance. Every hilltop, every creek crossing became a potential pivot for strategy. Officers measured distances, considered angles of fire, and anticipated British maneuvers. Maps, though rudimentary, were meticulously annotated, showing not only terrain, but the psychology of the approaching enemy, how they might react under pressure, where overconfidence could be exploited. Meanwhile, British forces under General Burgoyne advanced steadily, yet not without unease. Their march through forests and swamps strained supply lines. Horses grew weary. Artillery slowed over rocky paths. The soldiers, though disciplined and trained, were uneasy in unfamiliar terrain. Rumors of guerrilla attacks haunted their nights. Native allies, including Mohawk warriors under Joseph Brant, provided reconnaissance and skirmishing support, but cultural miscommunications occasionally hampered coordination. Civilians watched these preparations with a mix of awe and dread. Women sewed bandages, baked bread, and carried messages between encampments, while children observed soldiers drilling or moving wagons, eyes wide with both fear and fascination. For them, the war was no longer a distant political struggle, it was immediate, visceral, and terrifying. Psychological preparation was as vital as physical readiness. Morning prayers, speeches, and the hoisting of flags bolstered morale. Soldiers wrote letters home, seeking courage in the thought of loved ones. Rituals polishing weapons, inspecting muskets, or even shared songs became acts of collective resilience. In the silence before the storm, these small human moments carried immense weight, forming bonds that would be tested in the days to come. Weapons and unit composition were crucial. Continental forces wielded a mixture of muskets, bayonets, and cannons, many scavenged or donated by sympathetic towns. Militia units carried hunting rifles, ideal for long-range harassment, while regular Continental soldiers relied on line infantry tactics. Burgoyne's army, by contrast, was a formidable blend of grenadiers, light infantry, loyalist regiments, and artillery specialists. Every musket, every cannonball, every disciplined formation represented the British confidence in their superior training, but confidence alone would not guarantee victory in the tangled forests of upstate New York. Tensions simmered in war councils. Gates debated defensive strategies, wary of overextension, while Arnold pushed for bold maneuvers to exploit enemy vulnerabilities. British officers pored over maps, recalculated march times, and argued over supply priorities. Each decision carried consequences, as a single error in planning could tip the delicate balance between triumph and disaster. Even as soldiers rehearsed formations and stockpiled ammunition, there was an undercurrent of fear, excitement, and anticipation. Every creaking wagon, every distant drumbeat, every whistle through the trees served as a reminder the clash was imminent. The battlefield itself seemed to hold its breath, a silent witness to the human drama about to unfold. By mid-September, both armies were in position. Continental troops had entrenched themselves on Bemis Heights and surrounding ridges, prepared to turn the terrain into an ally. British forces, confident yet weary, pressed forward through ravines and marshes, unaware that every misjudged step brought them closer to a trap carefully laid by those who knew the land and fought not for empire, but for freedom. The stage was set, the actors ready, and the air buzzed with the tension of impending history. The morning of September 19, 1777, dawned over the rolling hills of Saratoga with a deceptive serenity. Mist clung to the riverbanks, shrouding the forested ridges and concealing the nerves, sweat, and anticipation of two armies poised for collision. Continental troops, entrenched along Bemis Heights, tightened their formations, eyes darting through the fog, fingers brushing triggers and bayonets. On the opposite side, British regiments under General Burgoyne, 7,000 strong, including grenadiers, light infantry, loyalist units, and artillery marched southward, their polished muskets reflecting the first light, drums signaling unwavering confidence. The opening phase began almost silently. American sharpshooters, perched in trees and behind fallen logs, picked off officers and disruptors of British formations, exploiting every uneven ridge and hidden ravine. Benedict Arnold, daring and indefatigable, rode along the lines, waving troops forward, shouting commands over the thunder of distant drums and the crackle of gunfire. The fog became a weapon, British lines stretched thin, hampered by dense undergrowth and narrow passes. Arnold's audacity disrupted the enemy's rhythm, forcing them into fragmented attacks that played into the Americans' innate knowledge of the terrain. By mid-morning, the main engagement erupted. Cannons roared from fortified American positions, sending iron balls whizzing across open fields. Musket volleys thundered back and forth, the staccato rhythm punctuated by shouts, screams, and a metallic ring of bayonets meeting resistance. Horses screamed as cavalry units clashed, splintering fences and tearing through muddy earth. Amid the chaos, soldiers fought not only enemies but exhaustion, hunger, and the ever-present specter of death. One vivid scene captures the human intensity of the day. A young Continental soldier, barely 18, fell behind his unit after his musket jammed. Surrounded by advancing grenadiers, he crouched behind a fallen oak, heart hammering, until a comrade pulled him to safety. Nearby, a British officer, struck by a flanking maneuver, staggered but refused to surrender, rallying his men even as the tide began to turn against him. These microcosms of courage and fear mirrored the larger struggle of empires and ideologies clashing in violent intimacy. By afternoon, the battle reached its turning point. Burgoyne's forces, exhausted and disoriented by repeated skirmishes and the Americans' strategic finds, faltered. Arnold personally led a daring charge, exploiting a weakened flank and sowing confusion in British ranks. Militia units emerged from concealed paths, striking rear columns and supply lines. Every moment magnified the psychological toll. Soldiers who had marched confidently in the morning now trembled, their discipline cracking under relentless pressure. Civilian perspectives added another layer of drama. Families hiding in nearby homes reported gunfire that sounded like the roar of 1,000 lions. Smoke from burning wagons and scattered huts filled the sky. Children, some clutching dolls or pets, peered through windows, understanding at least instinctively that history was unfolding not in textbooks, but in their very backyards. Women carried water and bandages to aid the wounded, moving between lines under the threat of stray bullets. The war, until now abstract, became immediate, raw, and deeply personal. Burgoyne attempted to rally his troops, sending messengers and calling for reinforcements from expected units that were delayed or intercepted. Fatigue and miscommunication compounded the British plight. As night fell, fires illuminated the battlefield, revealing bodies, shattered wagons, and the trembling forms of exhausted men. Arnold, riding among his troops, encouraged them to hold fast, promising that a decisive push could end the day in their favor. The second day, October 7th, saw renewed fury. Americans, now emboldened by the previous skirmishes, launched coordinated attacks along multiple fronts. Artillery positions pounded the British center, while sharpshooters cut down officers, attempting to reorganize formations. Arnold, though officially sidelined by orders from Gates, ignored caution, leading charges that broke key positions. Burgoyne, for all his experience, found his army encircled and demoralized. Dense forest and rugged terrain neutralizes superior training and equipment. Individual acts of heroism punctuated the larger strategy. One account tells of a Continental soldier carrying a wounded comrade across open ground, under relentless fire, embodying the profound human element behind strategy and numbers. Another describes British regulars forming a desperate square to fend off attacks, holding their line until sheer exhaustion forced surrender. Smoke, the smell of gunpowder, and the cries of the injured created a sensory tapestry that engulfed both sides. By mid-afternoon, the cumulative effect of fatigue, clever American tactics, and terrain advantages became undeniable. Burgoyne, realizing that reinforcements would not arrive and that his supply lines were compromised, faced a grim choice. Retreat through hostile territory seemed suicidal, and continued engagement promised annihilation. As orders were given for surrender, a silence settled over the battlefield, a grim acknowledgement of both the cost and the turning tide of the war. The immediate aftermath on the field was staggering. Over 5,000 British troops would ultimately surrender, marking the largest single surrender of British forces during the conflict. The Americans, though victorious, were exhausted and burdened by thousands of prisoners and casualties. The fog lifted to reveal a landscape scarred by combat, flattened fences, trampled crops, and churned earth, silent witnesses to the ferocity of the struggle. This victory at Saratoga was not merely tactical, it was symbolic. It proved that the Continental Army, though less numerous and poorly supplied, could outmaneuver and outfight the professional British military. It shattered assumptions, inspired morale, and crucially, sent a signal across the Atlantic. The rebellion was not a fleeting insurrection, but a force capable of triumphing against a global power. The smoke of Saratoga's battlefield lingered long after the last musket was fired, and the British colors were lowered. Dawn on the following day revealed a landscape transformed, churned earth, broken trees, scattered equipment, and the eerie silence of exhausted men. The magnitude of the American victory was immediate and visceral. Over 5,000 British troops, including seasoned officers and loyalist units, lay at the mercy of the Continental Army. For many American soldiers, the triumph was both thrilling and sobering. Victory came at the cost of hundreds of lives, lives that would never return to plow fields or tavern tables. Leaders moved among their men, surveying the aftermath. General Horatio Gates, cautious and calculating, inspected the prisoners and fortifications, recognizing both the victory and the responsibility it entailed. Benedict Arnold, though officially restrained by Gates' orders, had emerged as a figure of daring audacity. His leadership and personal courage widely noted by both allies and enemies. For Arnold, the exhilaration of success was tinged with frustration. He understood that the narrative of the battle might not fully reflect his pivotal role. The wounded required urgent attention. Makeshift hospitals rose in barns, village homes, and tents. Civilians, compelled by compassion and fear, aided in tending the injured, binding wounds with frayed cloth, and providing water and bread. The battlefield became a scene of human endurance, groans of the suffering, the hurried footsteps of medics, and the low murmurs of prayers mingled with the scent of blood and earth. American troops, exhausted yet disciplined, organized the processing of prisoners, ensuring that despite the brutality of war, their cause would not be stained by cruelty. Psychologically, the impact rippled through both armies. British soldiers, once confident in the invincibility of their imperial might, were demoralized. Many struggled to comprehend how a ragtag assembly of colonies had achieved what seemed impossible. Officers debated mistakes in leadership, misjudgments of terrain, and the cumulative effect of relentless skirmishes and ambushes. On the American side, morale surged. Letters home brimmed with pride and relief. Townsfolk celebrated cautiously, aware that while a decisive victory had been won, the war was far from over. Territorial control shifted. Key positions in the Hudson River Valley were now firmly in American hands, creating a strategic barrier to further British incursions from the north. Supply lines that Burgoyne had depended upon were severed, and communication with distant units delayed or blocked entirely. The Americans, though exhausted, now held both physical and psychological advantage, their confidence tempered by the immediate awareness of vulnerability and the ongoing threat of renewed British attacks. Stories emerged immediately, adding human texture to the historical narrative. One account tells of a British officer who, upon surrendering, shook hands with a Continental soldier who had saved him from a sniper's bullet. The day before, an unspoken acknowledgement of bravery on both sides. Civilians spoke of Arnold's audacious charges, the bravery of militia sharpshooters, and the strange camaraderie that formed among soldiers of vastly different backgrounds. When faced with mortal danger together, these narratives would soon be told and retold, shaping the legend of Saratoga long before the ink dried on formal dispatches. Within hours, word of the victory began to travel. Messages dispatched to the Continental Congress carried not only reports of triumph, but also a sense of opportunity. This was more than a battlefield win, it was a political and diplomatic signal. The world had taken notice, and the reverberations would soon reach European courts, where France, long cautious, began to see the feasibility of a formal alliance with the rebellious colonies. By the end of the first week, Saratoga was etched into collective consciousness, a site where courage, strategy, and circumstance converged to produce an outcome that neither empire nor colonist could have anticipated fully. For those who lived it, the soldiers, officers, and civilians, the memory was raw. a mixture of grief for the lost, pride in achievement, and apprehension for what the next chapter of war would demand. The immediate aftermath was thus both a closure and a prelude, a reflection of loss and a promise of strategic momentum that would ultimately shift the course of the Revolutionary War. The reverberations of Saratoga extended far beyond the hills and forests of upstate New York. The American victory, once celebrated on the battlefield, became a diplomatic tremor that shook the foundations of international power. Across the Atlantic, French diplomats and military advisors watched intently as news arrived, carried by ships that raced along the eastern seaboard. What had once seemed a fragile rebellion now appeared capable of defeating Britain in a decisive engagement, and France's cautious interest turned into calculated commitment. By 1778, formal treaties cemented France's alliance with the United States, providing warships, troops, and crucial financial support that would change the trajectory of the war. Strategically, the victory shifted the balance of power. Britain could no longer rely on the assumption that New England, the birthplace of resistance, would be isolated and subdued. Burgoyne's surrender disrupted British plans to divide the colonies along the Hudson River corridor, forcing a recalibration of military objectives and troop movements. The Continental Army, bolstered by its own success, gained newfound credibility. Soldiers' morale soared, and recruitment became easier, as the news of triumph inspired patriotism and a sense of historical destiny. The psychological and cultural impact was profound. Across the colonies, communities celebrated victories with fervor, recounting tales of heroism that blurred the line between fact and legend. Benedict Arnold, whose daring exploits during the battles were pivotal, became a celebrated figure, though history would later cast shadows over his reputation. Ordinary soldiers, often nameless in official records, became the heroes of local lore, their courage memorialized in letters, diaries, and stories passed down for generations. The idea that ordinary men could confront a global empire and emerge victorious became a defining motif of the American identity. Economically, the alliance with France injected much-needed resources into the struggling American war effort. Supplies of weapons, artillery, and trained military advisors transformed the Continental Army from a primarily militia-based force into a more professional fighting body capable of sustained campaigns. Trade routes, previously under threat from British control, now benefited from French naval support, allowing essential provisions to reach embattled troops. The infusion of capital and material aid directly contributed to subsequent successes and extended the revolution's longevity. The political ramifications were equally significant. European powers, previously hesitant to intervene, reassessed their positions. Spain, too, moved cautiously toward support, calculating that British distraction in North America could be leveraged to regain influence. Elsewhere, domestically, the Continental Congress found its authority strengthened. Leaders who had long feared internal dissent now wielded the moral and political capital of a tangible victory, enhancing legitimacy and unifying previously fractious colonial interests. Saratoga also influenced military thought and strategy for generations. Commanders studied the battle to understand the interplay between terrain, intelligence, and the psychology of troops. The Americans' ability to turn a disadvantage in numbers into a tactical advantage through strategic positioning and timely offensives became a model for asymmetric warfare. British officers, conversely, confronted the dangers of overextension, rigid planning, and underestimating irregular forces. The lessons extracted from these engagements would resonate in military academies for centuries. Beyond the immediate war, the long-term social and cultural effects were substantial. Communities ravaged by skirmishes and marching armies undertook reconstruction, fostering resilience and local solidarity. Monuments and commemorations would later emerge, cementing Saratoga as a symbol of collective courage and strategic acumen. The battlefield itself became a site of memory, a place where the American story of independence was tangibly enshrined. What if scenarios inevitably rose in historical reflection? What if Burgoyne had received reinforcements on time? What if Arnold had been fully constrained by Gates' orders and not led his audacious maneuvers? Each counterfactual illustrates the delicate interplay of leadership, terrain, and human decision-making. These questions emphasize that history is not predetermined. Rather, it hinges on individual choices, luck, and the broader context of circumstance. Saratoga's ripple effect extended to the global stage. The American colonies, once considered peripheral, had proven that resilience, intelligence, and audacity could challenge an established empire. European powers began to recalibrate their diplomatic and military strategies, and the war in North America became a theater with worldwide implications. For the young United States, the victory was more than tactical. It was existential validation. It signaled that independence was achievable, that alliances were possible, and that the revolution was no mere rebellion, but the dawn of a new political and cultural era. In sum, the long-term impact of Saratoga was profound, a strategic turning point, a diplomatic catalyst, and a cultural milestone. It reshaped the Revolutionary War, emboldened American forces, drew France into the conflict, and demonstrated the power of strategic ingenuity and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. It left a legacy of lessons both tactical and human that would echo through history, proving that even in the chaos of war, decisive leadership, terrain mastery, and the will of ordinary individuals could alter the course of nations. The Battle of Saratoga stands as one of the most decisive moments in the Revolutionary War, a turning point that redefined the struggle for independence. Here, on the rolling hills and hidden ravines of upstate New York, ordinary men transformed into extraordinary actors on a global stage. The victory was not merely a triumph of arms, but a demonstration of strategic vision, courage under pressure, and the profound impact of morale and terrain in shaping the outcomes of war. From a military perspective, Saratoga illustrates the power of adaptive leadership. Horatio Gates' defensive acumen provided the framework, but it was the audacious maneuvers of Benedict Arnold that turned tactical opportunities into irreversible outcomes. The lesson is clear, even in hierarchical structures. Individual initiative, when guided by knowledge and courage, can change the course of history. Leadership, in this context, required both foresight and the willingness to take calculated risks, balancing discipline with innovation. The human dimension of the battle offers equally vital lessons. Ordinary soldiers, farmers, tradesmen, and townsfolk proved that resolve and ingenuity could rival professional military training. Their determination, endurance, and capacity to endure extreme fatigue, hunger, and fear remind us that the human spirit is a decisive element in any conflict. The narratives of heroism, sacrifice, and solidarity provide enduring examples of courage that transcend time and geography. Strategically, Saratoga underscores the importance of understanding terrain, logistics, and enemy psychology. The Continental Army exploited the dense forests, ridges, and river crossings to offset numerical inferiority. British overconfidence, miscommunication, and underestimation of the colonists' resolve proved fatal. Modern leaders, military or otherwise, can draw parallels. Preparation, reconnaissance, and situational awareness remain critical, whether on a battlefield or in organizational strategy. Beyond military lessons, the battle had profound political and diplomatic consequences. By convincing France to ally with the United States, Saratoga expanded the war into an international conflict, demonstrating how a single engagement can shift the balance of global power. Alliances, morale, and perception can be as decisive as cannon fire. The battle reinforces a timeless truth. Victories resonate far beyond immediate outcomes, shaping diplomacy, economics, and public perception. Saratoga also invites reflection on contingency and what-if moments. Had reinforcements arrived for Burgoyne, or had Arnold been restrained, history might have unfolded differently. Yet the convergence of preparation, bold decision-making, and the collective will of soldiers and civilians created an irreversible momentum. This teaches that while luck and circumstance always play roles, preparation and initiative maximize the potential for success. As we reflect on Saratoga today, the panorama of the battlefield offers more than nostalgia. Rolling hills, reconstructed fortifications, and commemorative monuments invite contemplation of sacrifice, strategy, and resilience. The echoes of musket fire, the shouts of officers, and the cries of the wounded may be silent, but their lessons reverberate in modern military academies, leadership seminars, and the collective memory of a nation. Ultimately, the Battle of Saratoga is a testament to the interplay of human courage, strategic insight, and historical circumstance. It reminds us that decisive outcomes are rarely the product of a single factor, but of the alignment of preparation, ingenuity, timing, and resolve. For students of history, leaders, and citizens alike, the story of Saratoga teaches endurance in the face of adversity, the importance of decisive action, and the power of ordinary individuals to shape extraordinary change. As the sun sets over Bemis Heights, painting the landscape with golden light, the scars of battle fade into memory, yet the impact endures. The American Revolution was far from over, but the path toward independence had been irrevocably altered. For those who witnessed it, and for all who remember, Saratoga is not only a historical event, it is a lesson, a warning, and an inspiration. A reminder that the courage of a few can indeed reshape the destiny of many.